Hi, and welcome to another episode of A.S.K on CYC. So the Bible says to us, "Blessed are those who are persecuted in my name's sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." So on today's episode, we are going to talk about those who are persecuted. But persecution still happens today in today's society, but in the form of terrorism. So we have a very special episode for you tonight in memory of those who have passed in the recent terror attacks in Cairo, in the cathedral, in the church of our Coptic brothers and sisters. So please tune in and let those who want to know more about this, give them the link or tell them about tonight's episode and give them the opportunity to ask questions or speak up and voice their opinions, because we as a minority, we also have a voice. So we have a very special guest here tonight. We have with us Monica from the Australian Coptic Movement. Welcome, Monica, to the show.
Hi, Mina. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you.
And just a reminder to our audience members, if you want to ask a question either through a text or give us a call and speak to Monica on tonight's show, the phone number is 0430 115 832. And we're not limiting tonight's episode to just questions. If you want to share your opinions or views on this topic, please don't hold back. This is a live show giving you the opportunity to do so. The phone number is 0430 115 832. Thank you. So, Monica, the social media has been flooded and the news have been flooded with stories about what happened on the 11th of December in Cairo. But sometimes, I've learned that media has their own agenda and not all stories come out how it is. So I want you to give the audience your understanding of what actually happened on the 11th of December in Cairo.
Sure. So just from what I've gleaned and the reports that I've read, there was obviously a bomb attack. It's been one of the deadliest attacks in Copt's recent history. The Church of St. Peter and St. Paul was attacked, and this is the church that sits next to the main cathedral, which is, where the home of the Pope. So it's considered the heart of the Coptic Church. The fact that it was, again, next to the main cathedral. We understand that it happened, we now know it was a suicide bomber who actually entered the church from the inside. So people were praying their Sunday Mass on a Sunday, and he came in through the church, sat near the women's section. As you know, in Egypt and in Coptic culture, obviously, men and women are separated. So obviously a bit strategic on his part to pick women and children. Sat near their side, and a bomb was detonated around 10 o'clock in the morning, which has been just really shocking. The numbers I've read have been at 27 dead, and I think it's over 50 injured. So lots of people still in hospital with really serious injuries. Yeah, it's really, really devastating. You
know what concerns me is I hear that this is one of the most highly secure churches in all of Egypt. So how was this security so passed?
You know what, that baffles me as well. What we understand is, however, this man actually went to that church the day before. He posed as someone that was interested in, Muslim, interested in looking at converting to Christianity. So he approached some people the day before on the Saturday night, and they said, come back tomorrow when the bookshop is open and we can give you some books. So he was actually there scouting it out. I think he came, I know the security's tight, but the fact that he came in, it wouldn't surprise me if the initial plan was to perhaps attack the main church, but perhaps the security is too great there. So the fact that he slipped in, came in through the church, and was able to position himself adds to the shock. And it's definitely, I don't think, a coincidence that he has, or the terrorist has, really chosen to. It's quite symbolic, really, because this is really the heart and soul of the Coptic Church, the cathedral area, that whole area. So it's really shocking.
So what is your sense of this attack of reactions of the people of Egypt, and not only the Coptic people, the people in general of Egypt?
Yeah, you obviously get the reactions you'd expect, which is the absolute grief and the sadness at the loss. But you can also sense from the people, you know, just from videos you see, that there's a real incredible sense of frustration. The fact that that yet another attack has happened to Copts. So yeah, there is definitely, I have to say, an element of frustration and anger there. This is on the Copts' part. On people who are Muslim, I mean, I spoke to my auntie just today, earlier in fact, and she was telling me that the majority of Muslim people are really sympathetic and understanding, and people are going up to her and offering her condolences for what's happened to her community, the Coptic communities, which is really encouraging to see. I mean, I know I've seen things circulating on social media where there is a small number of extremists that have been gloating over the loss and, you know, saying some really awful things about being infidels and, you know, horrible things that we don't want to repeat. But I know that that's only a small minority, and I think the majority of Egypt is really mourning at this terrible tragedy.
Okay, I read up that the President Sisi, he declared a 3-day mourning period after the attack. Is that all that he's doing? And do you think his response so far has been adequate enough for what has happened?
Yeah, I know that, you know, he organised the national state funeral, which I think is quite symbolic, and it's a really good gesture on the part of the Egyptian government to show that solidarity. And the fact that he's declared the 3 days of mourning again emphasises that solidarity. The thing with the funeral, though, is a bit of a compliment to our community, but also it was a bit difficult because the security was so tight. It meant that a lot of relatives couldn't actually attend the funeral, and so they weren't given an opportunity to grieve, and that, you know, that also added to the element of frustration, and, you know, the fact that they weren't able to enter and trying to get in and they couldn't get in. So that was a bit tricky. Having said that, you know, when Sisi came in, he obviously come in after Egypt had experienced the rise of Morsi and the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, and extremists seem to be taking on full reign and being given these, reign to make life a bit difficult, really, for Christians. So when President Sisi came in, it was a real sense of hope for Coptic Christians that this would be a new change. And look, I think he has done some good things. He's definitely shown more solidarity with our church. Something like attending our Christmas Mass, for example. You know, that speaks volumes. Having said that, you know, if we look at the past 3 years, there still has been attacks on Coptic Christians, and, you know, in lots of cases, these attacks continue unabated. The perpetrators seem to get off scot-free, and it still seems there's a lot of work to do, and a lot of work for the Egyptian government to do in order to, you know, give people justice and give Copts an equal playing field, you know, with their Muslim counterparts in Egypt.
Sure. So there could have been more done by the president in terms of protecting Christians being the minority in Egypt. I
definitely think that, yeah, there is a lot more work to be done. I know he has it tough. He's dealing with, perhaps a small percentage of extremists, but that small percentage seems very hard to control. He's got issues in the Sinai, and, you know, the police are being attacked as well. So, you know, terrorism in Egypt is a real threat, and it's a big responsibility. But having said that, you know, Copts seem to be bearing the brunt of it. And I think the Egyptian government needs to, you know, recognise it, needs to really clamp down on terrorism in Egypt, because it affects the whole country, it ruins the whole country.
Okay. So how about the Australians? How have the Australians reacted to this?
Yeah, I think they're really echoing the sentiments of how Egyptians are feeling, to be honest. So, the sense I get is there's, first of all, obviously the incredible grief at what our brothers and sisters are going through. And again, I think, on top of the grief and the mourning, we're also feeling, I guess, a lot of, a sense of anger and frustration that, Copts yet again are being attacked purely for being Christian. Yeah.
Okay. Just a reminder to our audience members, please, this is your opportunity to speak up and have a voice. Ask a question or share your opinion or thoughts on this tragic attack on Cairo. The phone number is 0430 115 832. Please, this is your opportunity. We have given you a live show. Take the opportunity, send us a question, share your thoughts, and share this experience with us on tonight's show. Thank you. So, I know I'd like to, share this with the rest of the world who are watching, that this has become a norm in Egypt for Coptic Christians to be attacked. So there's been many more attacks before.
Yeah.
And we don't hear about it much in the news, but this has become everyday news for us Copts. But what makes this attack different? Because my social media has been blown with people sharing and people speaking up and people voicing their opinions on this particular attack compared to all the other attacks hundreds of attacks that's happened in the past during my lifetime.
Yeah. Well, I think that the thing with this attack is obviously the sheer gravity of it. In terms of number of deaths, for example, I'd say it's probably the biggest attack in recent history on the Copts. But I guess what really comes to the core of this one, or what really strikes a nerve, is the fact that it was an attack on the inside of the church. I mean, if we compare it to the 2011 bombing in Alexandria, that bomb was detonated outside the church. But there's a sense of vulnerability when the perpetrator actually is within the congregation, and there's also that vulnerability of choosing to side with poor children and women. Not to say that any loss of life is easy, but there's a real sense of vulnerability, and this one's been getting, I guess, because of that, a lot of attention. But I think what I should also mention is, adding to that element of frustration, is, as you mentioned, this is just one attack. There's been several attacks that have happened to Coptic Christians, perhaps not bombings, but it's also the smaller events that don't get as much media attention. And I was reading an article the other day which mentioned that this is actually the 54th incident in 2016.
Wow. All in just 1 year.
1 year, 2016. I mean, there are smaller things that don't get the media attention, but they're still really significant sectarian attacks. And I'll give you a few examples. You will have remembered the 70-year-old lady who got dragged in the streets, stripped naked and dragged in the streets. Syed Thabit, that's her name. And in her case, she was dragged to what they call a reconciliation session, where they have to, the victim has to sit with the perpetrator, and it's really a way to sort of force them to agree to some settlement or agreement without really giving them real justice or real recourse to some sort of judicial response, essentially. So that's one example. You'll recall, again, this is just in the last few months, there was a 13-year-old girl who, Louisa Murad, I've got her name here, she's the daughter of a priest. She was stabbed and it was well known who the person was. It was in a market in Sohag. Now, the culprit who did that was, it was obvious that she was attacked for her faith, but they dismissed him as having mental illness, and no justice has been done there. I'll give you another example. A pharmacist, Magdi Atiyah, he was stabbed to death and decapitated, awful stuff. And it was all captured on CCTV. They saw the person who was bloodied from the scene, leave. So it was well known to the authorities who did it, and yet that person is, hasn't been charged. So it's things like that, the attacks on homes and businesses. As you know, churches are routinely, often, it's not unusual for them to be vandalised, for businesses to be vandalised. And these sorts of incidences might not get reported in the media. I mean, we hear about the big bombings and that sort of thing, but the everyday occurrences, the harassment of women and that sort of thing, of cops that have a cross, just go, unnoticed, and either they're forced to do some sort of reconciliation session, or the perpetrators go scot-free, and it adds to that element of violence. Of frustration. The fact that this violence occurs and nothing happens.
But these events may seem insignificant to news bodies, but what's more significant than human life?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, every incident is it's an abuse of a human right. I mean, it's freedom of religion is a human right, and it's interesting that now the Egyptian country obviously is now going to be a participant in the UN Council. So it'll be interesting to see, with that responsibility, whether they recognise that this is a human right of Christians to practice their religion in freedom without fear of being persecuted.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting? Lately, there's been a lot of controversy behind one of the news presenters, Walid.
Yes.
He's very vocal when it comes to terrorist attacks.
Yeah.
But he chose not to be vocal on this certain attack, even though it's one of the biggest attacks to happen on the streets of Egypt. Being Egyptian Muslim background, we question why he hasn't been vocal on this particular attack. And it's my newsfeed on social media has been blown up with people voicing their opinions on why Walid has chosen to stay quiet. What's your thoughts on this matter?
Yeah, look, Walid is a TV anchor, so he can choose what topics he's passionate about or not passionate about, or what he wants to speak about, whether it's on his TV show or through journalism. Having said that, yeah, I agree. It is it's unusual. I mean, he's an Egyptian. And you would think it's quite close to home to him to mention this attack, which is, again, as I say, is one of the biggest attacks in recent history. So the fact that he hasn't said anything, it is disappointing. It's from my perspective, and I know that a comment was made and shared on Facebook, and it seems to have gone viral through, it's just shared on the ACM page. And it's been shared, and so obviously people are sharing the same sentiment. So yeah, there is a level of frustration. People you think want to speak out for you and don't. But the other sort of end of that is, okay, he's a TV anchor. He might not want to speak about it for whatever reason, but then you've got our Australian politicians that represent us. I mean, that I think is the other more disappointing element, to be honest. I don't think the response has been particularly strong, and we haven't really seen strong words of condemnation come out from our federal government. So that, I think, is also something that we really need to consider. Yeah.
Sure. Hopefully, because of this tragic event and because of the power and the people are starting to speak up now, hopefully things change here in Australia.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry, we've got time for one more question before we go for a quick break, but I just want to encourage the audience members to send in your questions or thoughts or opinions to 0430 115 832. This is an opportunity for you to share on tonight's live show. Thank you. So I want to talk more about the motivation behind a terrorist, particularly this terrorist. So what motivates a terrorist? I'm trying to understand what goes through their mind to commit such an evil act. I know to them it may not seem evil, but to the world it is an evil act. And do you think people are born terrorists, or do they become terrorists?
Yeah, I mean, It's a really good question, because you've got to really question someone who's that motivated to want to be willing to kill themselves for their cause. Tells you that, you know, there's a certain level of, I don't want to say brainwashing, but it is a brainwashing there, that he's so committed to his cause that he doesn't even care about his own life. You've really got to question that motivation. I know they identified the suicide bomber as being a 22-year-old young man, and they've arrested 3 assailants or accomplices. But we have to question who was speaking to him in the background to motivate him to commit this terrorist act. I don't think it doesn't come up just from thin air. People don't just wake up and say, I want to be a suicide bomber today and kill a bunch of Christians. And I actually think that it's systemic of a really deeply rooted issue, which is, the sectarianism of Egypt. From a very young age, I think even in the school system, kids are really taught to be different. You're Muslim and you're not Muslim. And the school textbooks, I remember when I went to Egypt and I was helping my cousin with his homework, he had to write lines, and had to sort of, like it was practicing your writing, and it was reciting verses of the Quran. And he's a Christian, yet he was forced to do this. And there were verses sort of to allude the difference of there's no other religion but Islam. And if you're teaching kids from a young age, there's the us and them mentality, and you sort of instill that seed of hatred rather than being inclusive and unifying, it obviously doesn't help. And then you've got, of course, the other stage to further sort of cement that segregated, ideology. You've got mosques preaching messages of hate and enforcing that message, and creating further division. So that's really where it stems from. We really have to, and I guess we can only fight terrorism as an ideology with thinking. You fight thoughts with other thoughts. And I think there needs to really be a revolution in Egypt, starting from the education system for kids, trying to get rid of this us and them mentality and really teaching respect, love and tolerance. Otherwise the country's not going to move. Yeah.
You know what I find very interesting?
Yeah.
When a terrorist attack happens worldwide, ISIS are the first to put their hand up and claim responsibility for it. It makes me feel as if they're building up a resume or something.
Yeah.
This is a qualification to add to their list.
Yeah, they're proud to say, hey, we'll claim this one. We're that, we're that scary and formidable.
But what's funny about that is, through the act of terror, they're trying to create fear.
Yeah.
But Coptic Christians worldwide don't have this fear that they're trying to instill in them, and these attacks make them stronger. That's what amazes me about the Coptic faith.
It is amazing, isn't it? Every time an attack happens, our church it just seems to do this. We get stronger in our faith. The people in Egypt are amazing. I honestly look at them in awe, and their commitment to their faith, despite the threat of terror and despite possibly being harassed on your way to church or whatever it is, doesn't stop them at all. And I was reading an article where one of the victims, her husband, was actually saying that morning, oh, let's not go to church, I'm really tired. They just love Christ that much. And even after the attack, you're hearing stories about how they forgive the terrorist that did it. Like, it's just mind-boggling. So whether it was ISIS or the Muslim Brotherhood, whoever did it, they think they can make us scared and fearful, and that somehow, that this is going to scare us from going to church or believing in Christ, but it actually having the opposite effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we come back from the break, I want to focus more on the victims. Until then, we're going to go for a quick break. And thank you for having me on the show. So just a reminder to our audience members, the phone number is 0430 115 832. The phone number will always be on the screen, so please don't wait for me to tell you the number. This is your opportunity on tonight's live show. Share your thoughts, opinions, or ask questions. Thank you.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Hi and welcome back to Ask on CYC, where we have a special episode on the recent attacks in Cairo. So please, this is your opportunity to get involved and share your opinions on tonight's show. The phone number is 0430 115 832. We have with us tonight on tonight's show Monica to address from the Australian Coptic Movement. So let's get back into tonight's show. We focus more about the act of terrorism and the terrorists and how the people are reacting. So now I want to focus on the actual victims themselves. I know when I first started the show, I introduced with a Bible verse, and the verse was from Matthew 5:10-12. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteous sake, for there is the kingdom of heaven. So would it reassure us and give us peace knowing that that these victims of persecution have gained the kingdom of heaven, because the Bible clearly states it?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, these beautiful women and kids were at church on a Sunday, receiving the body and blood of Christ. There's no question that where their heart was really, and so they were martyrs. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a perfect verse. They're persecuted, and they are certainly blessed. That's a one-way ticket to heaven right there, I think. Yeah, what a beautiful way to go when you're in the mass. I think there's no concern about the victims and where they are. It's really, I think what's more sad is the families that they've left behind. That's the hard thing. Yes, we're encouraged and we know where they are, but obviously there's still a deep sense of loss. There are husbands that are going to have to live now without their wives, their sister, their mother. I mean, it's really tragic. It's touched not just immediate families, but it's entire communities. So it's going to be a really hard time, not just for those families, but yeah, the whole community as well. And I think a certain level needs to be done to, I'm sort of going off tangent here, but to help those families well on in the future, given that they've lost an integral part of their family. Whether it be financially or, just help around, normal household stuff or whatever it is. There's going to definitely be a lot of support required.
Sure. Yeah. We just got a question that came in from an audience member.
Yep.
They're asking, how do we protest against this event without undermining Egypt's international image and LCC's internal efforts?
That's a good question. It's definitely a delicate balance. I think we do have to recognise the good that has been done in Egypt and the positive steps that have been taken. I mean, if you look at the 2011 bombing in Alexandria, unbelievably, those perpetrators have still not been punished for their crime.
Really?
So, yeah, this was in 2011. How many years have elapsed and we still haven't had justice for those 23 victims that were killed in that bombing? But let's give credit where it's due. Within days of this happening, they identified the suicide bomber. Pretty gruesome, but they actually had to piece his face together, and it was verified by eyewitness accounts of people who had seen him at the church before the bomb went off. So they've identified him, they've arrested the accomplices. What now needs to remain is, now the arrests have taken place, we just need to wait and see that the investigation's properly carried out and they are actually brought to justice. So let's give credit where it's due. The Egyptian government so far has been quite transparent and has been doing a good job or handling a good job of the investigation. But we do need to put pressure on the Egyptian government in making sure that justice is served for these victims. And indeed for, the victims of past attacks as well. I think, yes, we need to be a bit careful about how we, because it is our country after all, and it affects the whole country, how we portray Egypt. But at the same time, justice needs to be done and we need to speak out. And I think it's really crucial that there's an element of international pressure that's put on the Egyptian government to say, look, you're meant to be, if you want to be treated as an equal playing member of of the world and a reputable country, you really need to step up with your human rights abuses and address the human rights abuses and clean up your track record, because at the moment Cops are not being respected as equal playing members. Yeah.
Okay. I have a very similar question to that, because I've
Yeah.
been seeing a lot of people speak up lately, especially on social media. And I know it's not a bad thing to speak up, because even our Lord Jesus Christ spoke up when they hit him, and he turned around and questioned, "Who struck me?"
Yeah.
So how can we do so? Because the Lord, when he questioned it and spoke up, he done it in so much peace. How can we do it? How can we speak up but still maintain that peace? Because sometimes we can be driven by anger and passion that we can forget about peace and forget about teachings of our Lord.
Yeah, Mina, I'm really glad you raised that point, because, and the example of when Christ was slapped, he said, "Why do you strike me?" Often we hear the message of they're martyrs, we're told that we're going to be persecuted and that we need to accept it and forgive them and pray about it. I'm really not undermining the role of prayer. That is number one thing that we should be doing as Christians, is praying not just for the victims and their families, but also for those that don't know Christ, the people that are motivated to do these horrendous crimes. So yes, prayer is number one and it's paramount. But having said that, we do have an obligation, and it's a Christian obligation, to speak out for the oppressed. And I'm reminded of the verse in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17, which says, do what's right, defend the oppressed, seek justice, defend the oppressed. It says it very clearly. So yes, we can pray, and we do pray for those that are not close to Christ, that they may come to know Christ. But we do have an obligation as Christians to also speak out, to defend the oppressed and to seek justice. And I think as long as we try to maintain, you're right, we've got to do it with an element of love in our heart. We can still speak out against injustice, but still love the oppressor. And I know it's really hard to do in practice, and it's something I personally struggle with, to be honest, because it's so easy to get angry and just to say you hate all Muslims. But in our everyday lives and in our conversations, if we reflect Christ in how we treat our everyday Muslim neighbours, whether they're in next door neighbours or in your encounters at work, to show that you actually genuinely love them, I think is the number one step. But at the same time, to speak very forcefully about what is right and what is just. Yeah.
What amazes me the most, and what gives me hope from seeing past terrorist attacks, for example, the Coptic 21 martyrs that were killed, is seeing their family members after the ordeal and seeing how much peace and love and wellness that they wish upon the murderers, and how they are very forgiving towards the murderers who murdered their children and family members. And that amazes me the most. The fact that they show so much forgiveness, and the fact that they also are joyous that their children or family members have gained the crown of martyrdom. So my question is, how can we, as members of the Coptic community, and also members of Australia, the Coptic community here in Australia, how can we learn of this forgiving nature and show this to our oppressors?
Yeah. All I can say is, wow, it is really unfathomable that they could have so much love and forgiveness in their hearts. And I know exactly the videos you're talking about. Shortly after it happened in, the attack in Libya, these families that were left behind were saying, one account I read said that she was happy to invite the terrorist into her home and feed him a meal. It's just amazing. To be honest, I don't know how they have such faith, such amazing faith. And what's even more amazing is it's actually really quite embarrassing when you think about it. Like, their faith is so strong, their love for Christ is so strong, that they have this capacity to forgive. And yet, we're Christians here in the Western society, and any moment of people maybe making fun of us for our faith, or, you know, having some sort of conservative view of, you know, all these issues that happen in the Western world. But anyway, any hint of us being Christian, we sort of shy away from our faith. And yet these people are so firmly rooted in their faith. It really brings it home to say, you know what, I really need to work on my faith in Christ and work on my relationship with him, so that I can just have a little snippet of the faith that they have would be, you know, amazing. They're really saints of our church now. So people to look up to as role models for our faith, yeah.
Okay. Look, I have time for one more question to wrap up tonight's show. And I want to end tonight's show on what can be done? What can we do? Now being after it happened, how can we be reactive and what can we do? And also, God forbid, before any future event happens like this, how can we be proactive as being the minority or being Coptic Christians here in Australia or worldwide?
Yeah, well, I'll start by telling you what we have done as an ACM group. So shortly after the attack happened, we issued a formal statement, and that was circulated to media. I believe we were one of the first NGOs to do that. And as you know, the diocese has also issued statements both in Sydney and Melbourne condemning the attack. So purely getting the word out there is really important, and having the attention of the media on this issue is really important. So if people could, you know, try to get the attention of the media by writing in, showing interest, and also to their politicians, their local members. If you write a simple letter saying, look, we haven't heard from Turnbull on this issue, we want him to come out and condemn what's happened, Christians are really suffering, and raise it as an issue with your local member. The more pressure we have from international countries on this issue and bringing this issue to light, the fact that Christians are persecuted in Egypt, puts pressure on the Egyptian government, and it all helps. We obviously have been also active on social media, and we can't, you know, discount the effect that social media has. So, you know, keep those circulations going. You know, the ACM, some of the statements and uploads that we've done have been going viral. And there's been tweets to politicians and that sort of thing. So let's not forget, wherever you can raise awareness, I think that's number one key. And certainly from the ACM's part, we'll continue to try and push this issue because it's not something that's going to go away, unfortunately. The other thing we've done is to also try to raise the issue of Coptic asylum. So we've recently become aware that, you know, despite all that's been happening in Egypt and these sectarian attacks, as I mentioned, 54 this year, Copts are still getting rejected when they have their refugee visas in, applications, and they're still being rejected for asylum here in Australia, which is really disappointing because really Christians in Egypt are persecuted and they should be recognised as persecuted, and yet their visas are being denied. So we've raised this issue with some contacts in the media, and we're hoping this will catch on to put a bit of pressure on the federal government to really raise the intake for Christians coming from Egypt and also Syria and Iraq and, as you know, Middle East.
Has the immigration minister been contacted?
We actually contacted media to try and put pressure on the immigration minister, and we will promise that the person that we've spoken to will actually contact his department to get some facts, and we expect her to write an opinion piece very soon on the issue. But that is our next step. We will be approaching Minister Dutton and raising this issue with him.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned earlier the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull hasn't condemned publicly, but I know he has called up Amber Danielle, our Bishop of Sydney, and sent his condolences.
He has. Sorry, I should have acknowledged that.
But he needs to speak up.
I guess we are expecting, and it's good that he has done that, but I guess we're expecting a real strong, letter of condemnation or a statement of condemnation. The US State Department has done it. Israel's done it. Putin's done it. It would be great if Australia got on that bandwagon and really stood up to condemn what's happened.
Sure.
If anything, at least, hopefully we can get a bit of change with how these refugee applications are being treated.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, it was a pleasure having you on tonight's show, and
Thank
thank
you.
you for your insight on such a tragic story. But the world needs to know about this, and the world needs to speak up about this, but with peace, like the Lord Jesus taught us.
Yeah, Mina, if I can also add very quickly, as I said, this is something that really needs some ongoing advocacy. So if there are any people out there that are committed and interested in advocacy work, the ACM would love to hear from you. So drop us a note.
Okay, where can we get your details from?
Just on the Facebook page, just type the Australian Coptic Movement Association, it will come up, and just drop us a private message. We'd really love to hear from people that are interested in sort of continued advocacy work.
Okay.
There's lots to do.
Sounds good. Thank you once again.
Thanks, Mina.
And thank you to our audience members who've tuned in tonight's episode. I'm Mina Ibrahim from CYC Studios in Sydney. Good night and God bless.
CYC, Christian Youth Channel.
Hi, I'm Marina from St. Maurice and St. Verena in Toronto, Canada. Do you have questions? Any topic? Send them in to CYC for our new program called En Route. Come en route with us.
The girl will not look for a cute guy, because the devil, if he appears, he will be the most cute guy. We are the light of the world. As a Christian, you have the Holy Spirit. His O is Christianity, is to be a real Christian.